That night, no one slept. Anna and Mateo took turns keeping watch, sitting in silence at opposite ends of the boat. One guarded the darkness, listening for strange sounds from the shore, while the other tried in vain to catch a moment's rest, their mind reeling with images of living filaments and shadowy figures moving in the night. The atmosphere between them was no longer the awkwardness of strangers, but the silent bond of soldiers in the same trench, facing an invisible enemy together as the first rays of dawn pierced the thick fog, tinting the water a silvery gray. Anna made her decision. "We have to go back," she said, her voice hoarse from lack of sleep. Mateo looked up from where he was checking the engine, his expression unsurprised. "Closer?" "No," Anna shook her head. "Just close enough to observe. I need to confirm what we saw last night. I need to be sure." Mateo didn't argue. He understood the need for verification, even though his instincts screamed to flee. In the opposite direction, he started the engine, its low, steady hum breaking the morning silence. The boat slowly turned, heading back toward the nightmare they had just escaped. They moved cautiously, keeping a safe distance. Anna estimated over 200 meters from the island shore. The sun rose higher, dispelling the fog and bathing the island in a clear, almost overly ordinary light. From afar, the island of the dolls looked almost peaceful, a small, verdant, forgotten place. But both knew better. Anna pulled out her high-powered binoculars. She took a deep breath and raised them to her eyes. Her hands trembled slightly. The world leapt toward her. The trees, the foliage, and then them. The dolls as she feared, they were no longer in their original positions. Some had vanished from view, while others appeared in places she was certain were empty the night before. Their arrangement followed a perverse logic she couldn't comprehend. She swept the binoculars systematically, left to right, forcing herself to take in every ghastly detail. Then she stopped, her gaze locked onto a cheap plastic doll, the kind you might win at a carnival. It had fallen from a branch and lay face up in the black mud by the shore, one arm raised as if pleading for help. It was a tragic but unremarkable image until Anna adjusted the focus. Zooming in as far as she could, she held her breath on the doll's smooth plastic fingertips. Where there should only have been faint ridges from the mold, something was growing. They were shaped and sized like human fingernails. They weren't painted on. They were growing, pushing through the surrounding plastic, creating tiny hairline cracks. They were the sickly yellow of unhealthy keratin, and in the sunlight, Anna could see faint striations running their length. Organic life, a biological feature of vertebrates, was sprouting from an inanimate object, a product of petrochemicals, the laws of biology, physics. Everything Anna had ever known shattered in that moment. This wasn't just an aggressive microorganism. It was a force capable of rewriting the definition of life, blurring the line between organic and inorganic. "No. Impossible," she whispered, lowering the binoculars. Her chest tightened. Nausea rose. "What is it?" Mateo asked, seeing her expression. Anna couldn't answer. She handed him the binoculars, trembling. "Look," she said, her voice nearly breaking. The hand of the doll on the ground. Mateo took the binoculars, suspicion clear on his face. He raised them, silent for a few seconds. Then Anna heard him draw a sharp breath. He didn't lower the binoculars, staring for nearly a minute, as if forcing his brain to accept the absurdity his eyes were witnessing. When he finally set them down, his usually stoic face was ashen. He said nothing, only looked at Anna, and in his eyes, she saw her own horror-reflected silence envelop them. In that silence, Ona's mind began piecing together the facts with terrifying clarity, the filaments under the microscope, trying to invade her hair. Keratin, the fingernails growing from plastic. Keratin it wasn't just destroying. It wasn't just infecting, it was building. It was taking available materials, plastic, cloth, mud, and transforming them, creating organic components from inanimate objects. The dolls weren't corpses. They were cocoons. They were laboratories. My God. Ana whispered to herself, a new, colder, deeper fear seeping into every cell of her body. What is it building? Her question hung in the morning air, heavy and terrifying. Mateo didn't answer. He simply started the engine and steered the boat away from the deadly waters around the island. He needed distance, not just physical, but mental, before he could voice the things he'd been taught never to disturb. They stopped at a wider stretch of the canal, where the sunlight felt cleaner and the water flowed stronger. Mateo shut off the engine, and silence descended again, but this time it wasn't threatening. It carried expectation. Ana looked directly at the boatman. The wall of scientific arrogance within her had crumbled, leaving only a primal, urgent need to understand. Mateo, she said, her voice pleading. You know something, more than you've told me. The name Lacuna Quieta, Don Julian, the dolls. Please tell me everything. Mateo looked at her for a long moment, his eyes weighing the gravity of the words he was about to speak. Finally, he sighed, a weary exhale of someone carrying a burden too long. The story they tell tourists is a lie. He began, his voice low and steady. They say Don Julian Barrera found a drowned girl, then found her doll floating nearby. They say he started collecting dolls to appease her spirit. That's not true, Ana asked. Half true. There was a girl who died. But she wasn't the cause. She was just the first victim anyone knew about. Mateo gazed toward the invisible island. Long before that, the village elders spoke of this place. The Aztecs avoided it. They called what's down there Teocuitlacotl, the hunger beneath the mud. Something that shouldn't be awakened. The hunger? Ana repeated, trying to translate the folklore into her language. A predatory life form, an entity? It needs a body to live, Mateo continued. It seeks warmth, life to latch onto. Julian wasn't mad. He was sensitive. He felt it. Maybe after the girl's death, it grew stronger. It started reaching out. Julian realized something no one else did. If you don't give it what it wants, it will come looking. Silence fell as Ana tried to process his words. So the dolls. She began, her voice almost a whisper, not to appease his spirit, Mateo said, his words chilling her to the bone. They were sacrifices. False hosts. A horrifying realization flashed in Ana's mind. Julian gave that hunger the bodies it needed. Mateo explained. Hundreds of them. Plastic, porcelain, cloth. Cold, lifeless bodies. He turned the island into a feast. For it, a trap. He lured it to focus on those false hosts, so it wouldn't seek the children swimming or the villagers washing clothes by the shore. The island isn't a memorial, it's a prison. A containment zone built from discarded toys. The scattered pieces in Ana's mind snapped into a complete, terrifying picture. A biological containment ritual. A method to halt the spread by offering substitute hosts. The moving dolls. The keratin nails. It all made sense. The parasite was trying to turn its false hosts into real ones. It was trying to build life from artificial death. And then, a truth more horrifying than Mateo's story hit her. A truth about her own actions. The containment system had worked. It had kept the hunger confined to the island, its energy focused on those hundreds of lifeless cocoons. It had stayed in place until she came, until she, with her scientific confidence, plunged her sampling tube into the heart of that prison and took a piece of its core. She had broken the seal on his gaze, slowly shifted from Mateo's face to the sample case lying quietly at her feet. A simple, harmless metal box. But now, it was no longer a scientific treasure. It was a Pandora's box. She whispered, her throat constricting. I brought it out. Mateo followed her gaze, and his face drained of color. For the first time, Aina saw real fear in his hardened eyes, because they both realized at the same moment, the hunger was no longer confined to the island, it was on the boat with them. And around it, there were no more false hosts. The air on the boat thickened, heavy and suffocating. The metal case lay in the middle of the deck, no longer a scientific object but a ticking time bomb, silently leaking its malevolence into their confined space. Aina instinctively stepped back, the few feet between her and the case feeling like a fragile barrier between safety and danger. Mateo stood motionless at the bow, but his gaze no longer scanned the canal. He looked around his own boat as if seeing it for the first time as a trap. We have to do something, Aina said, breaking the deadly silence. Her voice trembled. Throw it overboard, into the canal, and let it find another place? Mateo replied, his voice low and ominous. Let it drift to another village? No, Julian kept it contained. That's the only reason it hasn't devoured this whole region. His reasoning was cold and irrefutable. They couldn't throw it away. They were stuck with it. Then we seal it, Aina said, clinging to logic. I have biohazard sample bags. We can put the case in one. And if it's already out. Mateo interrupted, his question hanging between them as their desperate conversation reached a dead end. Aina noticed Mateo unconsciously scratching his arm hard. It was an ordinary gesture, but in this context, everything normal became suspect. Your arm, Aina asked. What's wrong? Probably a mosquito bite, Mateo grumbled, but he kept scratching more frantically. Itches like hell. He rolled up the sleeve of his worn shirt to look. Aina stepped closer. At first, it seemed unremarkable, just a patch of slightly red skin, like an allergy or an insect bite. Mateo seemed to relax, but the itching didn't stop. Minutes later, he scratched again. This time, when he looked, they both fell silent. The red patch wasn't spreading, but it was changing. Its surface seemed to harden. The tiny pores and natural skin lines were fading, replaced by an unnaturally smooth sheen. In the sunlight, it reflected a faint, almost imperceptible iridescence, the same sickly rainbow hue Aina had seen on the water. It was like a patch of nacre or polished plastic grafted onto his flesh. Aina's stomach churned. She didn't need to touch it to know how it would feel. Cold, rigid, and utterly wrong. Mateo. She whispered. He didn't respond. He stared at his arm with silent horror. Slowly, he touched the altered skin with his other hand's fingers. He said nothing, but Aina saw a slight twitch in his face as he felt the alien texture on his own body. Parasite had found a host. The hunger had begun its feast. A wave of guilt and responsibility crashed over Aina, so strong it nearly brought her to her knees. This was her fault. She had brought this thing onto the boat. She had put this man in danger. All her scientific curiosity, her fascination with a new life form, vanished. Only one goal remained, clear and urgent. Save Mateo. The clock was no longer measured in days or hours. It was ticking with the spread of the deadly patch on his arm, Julian, Ana said suddenly, her mind grasping at the last piece of information, their final hope. You mentioned his shack, the fire. Mateo looked up, a faint glimmer of hope flickering in his despairing eyes. The legend says it's the heart of the curse, he said slowly, as if piecing together a memory. And only the fire from his hearth can purify it. It was a fragile hope, built on folklore, but it was all they had. Facing an enemy that defied every biological law, they had no choice but to trust in a ritualistic miracle. They locked eyes, a wordless decision forming between them. A reckless, suicidal decision to save a life. They had to return to the source of death. They had to go back to the island of the dolls. No more hesitation. No more whispered debates. The moment Mateo saw the altered skin on his arm, choice vanished. Only one desperate, mad imperative remained. Return. Mateo turned the boat with cold determination. It sped toward the island of the dolls, no longer a scientific expedition or a fearful scouting trip, but a raid into enemy territory. Ana sat across from him, clutching the metal case to her chest. It was no longer an object of fear, but their weapon, a biological bomb they had to deliver to the right place to detonate. She was no longer a researcher. She was the bomb's keeper. The boat slammed into the soft shore with a heavy thud, not docking gently as before. Both leapt off, their boots sinking into the black, wet mud. The air hit them, stifling and thick, with the stench of decay. This time, the feeling of being watched was no longer vague. It was as real as if hundreds of actual eyes were fixed on them from the shadows. Stay here, Mateo said, striding quickly to a small storage compartment on the boat. He returned with a long machete, its steel blade slightly rusted, but still sharp. He handed Ana a high-powered spare flashlight. Take this. Stay right behind me. Don't stop, no matter what happens. Ana nodded, her hands gripping the flashlight and the sample case tightly. They began moving inland, following a barely visible trail. The island was different now. It was no longer an eerie outdoor museum. It had become a living organism reacting to their intrusion. The dolls no longer hung from the trees. Many had fallen or been placed on the ground, scattered across the path. They forced Ana and Mateo to step over plastic bodies, dodging outstretched arms and legs in grotesque poses. Each step felt like a violation, an intrusion into some perverse order, and they were moving not grand movements, but small furtive ones, at the edge of vision. As Ana's flashlight beam swept across, she swore she saw a doll's head tilt slightly to follow. She heard faint rustling, the sound of plastic brushing against dry leaves. But whenever she looked directly, everything was still. The repetition was worse than a direct attack. It frayed her nerves, making her question what was real and what was her panicked mind conjuring. They advanced about 50 meters before stopping. Trail ahead was blocked, not by a fallen tree or dense brush. It was blocked by a wall of dolls. Dozens, perhaps hundreds, stood upright in the mud, shoulder to shoulder, forming a silent, dense barrier. They came in all sizes and shapes, but all faced them. Their glass eyes reflected Ana's flashlight, creating hundreds of cold, glinting specks in the dark. They did nothing. They just stood there, waiting. It's hurting us, Ana whispered, her voice thick with dread. It doesn't want us to leave this path. Mateo didn't respond. He gripped the machete tighter. The altered skin on his arm seemed to burn with greater intensity. He knew they couldn't turn back. He took a deep breath, stepped forward and raised the machete not to slash, but to push. The hollow clatter of plastic against plastic was chilling. He shoved the dolls aside, carving a narrow path. Some fell. Others tilted and then righted themselves after he passed. As he brushed past a large doll, his infected arm grazed it. He let out a soft groan as pain flared from the deadened skin. Anna stayed close behind, trying not to look at the lifeless faces inches away. It felt like wading through a river of children's corpses. After passing the doll wall, they saw it ahead. In a small clearing stood a dilapidated shack. Its thatched roof nearly rotted away, its wooden walls blackened with mold. Don Julian's shack. It didn't look like a shelter, but like a malignant tumor rising from the island's earth. The dark doorway gaped like an open mouth, ready to swallow them. They had reached their destination. But when Ana glanced back, she saw the dolls Mateo had pushed aside, slowly shifting, sealing the path they'd just cleared. The island wasn't just stopping them. It had led them here. And now it was sealing their only escape.
In the shadow of my archive, a new horror stirs. Date to listen.